Hello, welcome to a sunny First Chapter Friday. I am presenting to you outside, so you can hear a little bit of background sound, but hopefully not too much. Our story today is a mystery that won a nomination from the Edgar Allan Poe Association, and the book is The Christopher Killer. This book was written by Alane Ferguson. The moment of truth. Ready? Her father asked. Jacobs nodded, placed his hands carefully under the corpse's shoulders, while Justin put his hand beneath her hip. Her father held the head. 1, 2, 3, Patrick said. Careful now. The body was stiff, in full rigor, and as it rolled, the hair fell forward to cover the face in a chestnut-colored web. Gently, her father removed it, and then his eyes grew wide. Oh, no, he said. God, please, no. And then Cameron saw the perfect oval face and the eyes staring blankly, and she felt her hand fly to her mouth, while tears blurred her vision until she could not see any more. Yes, I can be there in half an hour. Any idea when he died? Cameron's father murmured into the telephone. He sat at the kitchen table, his legs sprawled out from the wooden chair, his thick, uncombed hair bristling from his head like roofing thatch, the pencil scratching along the yellow pad as he listened. That long in a bathtub filled with water, there'll be a stink. Keep the doors and windows closed and seal off the hallway if you can. A floater? That doesn't sound good, Cameron said under her breath. From her forensic books, she knew only too well what water did to skin. Outside, a bird wobbled from a low-hanging branch. It was strange, Cameron thought, the way routine things kept right on going, even when a death call came in at the Mahoney home. An anonymous body sat bloating in a tub of water, and yet golden Colorado sunlight still poured into their kitchen, setting fire to the orange-red flowers that lined the window ledge. The thwick, thwick, thwick of sprinklers blended into the hum of a distant mower, while her grandmother, whom she called Mama after the old Irish way, chopped a green pepper in cadence with the ticking of the wall clock. No matter what ugliness appeared, life just kept up its rhythm. Cameron's father, Patrick Mahoney, spoke again, his forehead furrowed into deep creases. Well, you just tell the good sheriff he can wait for me to finish my breakfast. It's only 7 in the morning, and a few more minutes won't make a whit of difference to the poor stiff in the tub. He's past caring. The person on the other end must have said something, because Patrick countered with, I'm no ghoul, deputy. I'm just the humble coroner. And just so you know, it's always better to eat before a call. The taste of decay stays in the mouth too long after. Goodbye. The phone clicked softly in its cradle, and he looked up innocently, although Cameron noticed his eyes twinkling. You shouldn't be tormenting the new deputy, son, Mama admonished in her soft Irish lilt. You'll scare him away. It's what you'll do. Not everyone can dance with the dead. Ah, the boy needs to toughen up, Patrick answered. And I guess I am a bit bent out of shape, because the good sheriff was able to hire help, while I've been left to carry the investigative load by myself. That's not the new deputy's fault. Don't be taking out your frustrations on him. Patrick looked up from beneath the shaggy brows. Let's just say I've had other issues with Deputy Crawley. But enough about him. I want to enjoy what's left of my morning. You're right, Mama agreed, nodding. Get the coffee going, girl. Cameron, who'd already begun, pressed the button on the coffee grinder, then pulled the lid off and tapped the pulverized beans into a mound that looked like rich earth. It smelled good, too, dark and pungent. Make it extra strong, Cammy, her father instructed as he picked up the newspaper and snapped it open. A floater first thing in the morning is a hard way to begin. Cameron moved on automatic pilot as she went through the motions of her one domestic skill. Her mind, though, worked the scene that her father would process in less than an hour. From her books, she knew what happened to bodies left in water. Mentally, she ticked off the steps her father would need to take as he took possession of the dead man. A cotton sheet, vinyl body bag, a digital camera, as well as biohazard bags to contain any medication left in the room. All had to be loaded in the back of their old station wagon, the ancient car that doubled as the town's hearse. Except for the camera, most of those items were stacked neatly on metal shelves in their garage, along with the wheelie gurney and a box of latex gloves, ready to be pulled out at a moment's notice. She turned just in time to notice Mama crack a shell with one hand, empty its contents into a glass bowl, and toss it into the sink. It rattled into the hole of the garbage disposal like a ball in a net. "Good shot," Cameron said with a laugh. "Did you play ball in Ireland, Mama?" "In my day, girls didn't want to sweat. We were taught to take care of our families. Which reminds me, are you ready to learn how to properly crack an egg?" Picturing the last time she'd tried to spread the shell single-handed and the mess she'd made, Cameron shook her head no. Besides, she had bigger dreams than baking pork in Guinness or doubling caudal. Her dreams, which her grandmother did not approve of. "Well, how about it, girl?" Mama pressed. "You're almost 18. It's time." Cameron looked at the eggs and wrinkled her nose. "You know I hate to cook." "That's because you never tried." "No, it's because there are more interesting things to do." Her grandmother looked at her sharply. "Like cutting into dead bodies?" Cameron swallowed back her irritation. "Yeah, the live ones kick too much." "Oh, so now it's humor, is it?" "You don't fool me, not for a minute," Mama said, pointing at her with a dripping shell. "Go ahead and make your jokes, but I'm worried about you. Your soul's getting dark lately. Don't think I haven't noticed. Why, in church last Sunday your lips barely moved when the creed was read. There was a time when you had said the words louder than anybody. Now you just sit, your mind engrossed in God knows what." Cameron yanked open the silverware drawer and pulled out a knife and fork. Standing by her father, she set the silverware on the table harder than she needed to. "My soul is fine," she said. "How can it be? Look at the ideas you take in. All those books you read on death and dying. Blood, splatter, bugs, crawling all those poor devils. Oh, yes, I've seen them." Her grandmother made a tisking sound beneath her teeth. "All along I told my Pat that he's making a mistake encouraging the way he does. But no one listens to me." "Ma, don't start," he moaned from behind the Silverton News. "Start what? I'm having a conversation with my only grandchild in my own kitchen." Patrick snapped the paper even wider and buried himself in its pages. "Thanks for the help, Dad," Cameron thought. Her grandmother had wrapped herself into a new cotton robe. As usual, the sleeves were too long and the bottom inch dragged across the kitchen floor like a terry mop. The too big garment made her look almost childlike, although Cameron knew that her grandmother was anything but when it came to the subject of her granddaughter's future career. Mama hated forensics. Like a chicken pecking grain, her grandmother picked and nibbled at Cameron's dream, convinced as she was that it would somehow twist Cameron's soul. "All I'm asking is this. Why can't you set your sights on becoming a real doctor?" "A forensic pathologist is a real doctor." The irritation welled in her throat, and she could no longer swallow it. "I mean a doctor who treats the living. With that brain of yours, there are lots of things that you could do. You're a headstrong girl, Cammy, but that stubbornness can take you down the wrong path." The heat rose inside her as she countered. I've told you 100 times that this is the path I want. Don't give me your cheek. It's that streak from your mother that's coming out. And that's the streak that'll get you in trouble. Oh, for Pete's sakes, Ma, her father cried. Leave her be. He slapped the newspaper onto the table loud enough to make Cameron jump. Suddenly, he looked weary. All I want to do is start my day in relative peace. I don't need the sound of my mother and daughter ringing in my ears when I leave. Give a man a break. Chastened, Mamma lifted her whisk and began beating the eggs so hard that they turned to lemony foam in a matter of seconds. I'm only speaking my mind, she muttered, straight into the bowl. I only want what's best for the girl. For a moment, there was no sound in the kitchen, except for her grandmother's whisk, flicking in percussive rhythm. Cameron stood, unsure of what to do while her grandmother's pale face turned to stone. She wanted to... what? Not run away exactly, but to be left alone. It almost made her laugh when she heard others complain about their parents, especially their mothers. Mamma was not only from another country, but, for all intents and purposes, another century. Her father sighed, then carefully folded his paper and smoothed it between his fingers. Finally he said, Cameron, honey, why don't you go outside and get me my folder? The one with the death certificates in it? You'll find it in the front seat, passenger side. Will you do that for me? Sure, she said, relieved to be set free. He grasped her hand as she went by and squeezed it gently. And, take your time, okay? Not a problem. The screen door squealed as she stepped outside into the cool morning air. The voices of her dad and grandmother rose and fell behind her like swells on the sea. I'm doing the best I can, Ma. But, son, I love that girl, and someone's got to pull her from the shadows. They were fussing again about her. She hated when they did that. Walking quickly, Cameron passed rows of flower pots that her grandmother had planted at the first sign of spring. Now was early October, which meant soon the plants would be brought in to the warmth of their home in order to cheat death. Flowers and food, that's what her grandmother was all about. Cameron and her father got along well enough, but her grandmother was something else entirely. They were opposites, bound by blood. The difference began in the way they looked. Both her grandmother and her father were pure Mahoney through and through. Patrick stood as tall as a grizzly, with a broad-barreled chest and paw-like fists that waved through the air whenever he talked. Although his hair had faded, it had once been a fiery red, and his heavy brows seemed to grow out farther every passing year. Her grandmother was a smaller version, with the same blunt nose and ice-blue eyes, and same jaw that squared when she was worked up over something, which seemed to Cameron to be way too much of the time. Cameron, on the other hand, was much more diminutive, which made her look as different as she felt, small and thin-boned, with long curly black hair that reached all the way to her waist. Her hair and her brown eyes were a gift from her maternal side, as were the high cheekbones and golden skin passed down from a very distant Cherokee relative. At least that's what she had been told. She had almost no memory at all of her mother, whom her father rarely spoke of. When Mamma did, it was only as a warning. Don't be doing that, she'd say. It's what she used to do. Or, no, girl, that's what she thought. It would be easier, Cameron knew, if her mother were dead. There would have been some finality in that. Instead, her mother had just disappeared one day, and after that, there were a few letters and then nothing. Hannah Mahoney was a stranger who hadn't bothered to call or write in years, a ghost who never haunted. Once when Cameron was 6, she and her father had curled up on their swing watching the twilight deepen into the velvet of night until the stars appeared, first pale and then bright, as they burned into the night sky. Tell me about Mommy, she'd asked. Against the rhythm of the squeaking swing, He told her about Hannah, how she had loved dogs in the color blue and other things that Cameron could no longer remember. But she still could recall snuggling into her father's scratchy wool jacket and asking, "But why did she go? Where is she?" I don't know. I just don't know," he'd whispered into her hair. "But I have to believe that one day soon she'll come back to us. She'll get better. She'll come home. You'll see." As the years passed, he spoke of her less and less, until he just stopped mentioning Hannah's name altogether. There'd been no divorce, no explanation, nothing. Sometimes in the quiet of the night, she would allow herself to think of her mother, but only for a moment. It was better to focus on the practical, on the here and now, on things that she could taste and see and touch. Her reality was the Mahoney Trinity, mother, son, and granddaughter, all living in a green shingled house high in the San Juan Mountains in a town no bigger than a post-it note. Cameron retrieved the folder in the front seat of the station wagon and returned to the kitchen, waiting long enough to be sure they weren't still talking about her. They weren't. It was quiet inside except for the chopping sound of her mamma's knife on the wooden board and her father's gentle slurping of coffee. While they went on with their morning, Cameron let the plan form in her mind, the one that she'd thought about before but was now taking shape, a piece at a time. Just this morning, the final piece had slipped into place. Exhaling a deep breath, she walked to the table and set down the folder. "Thanks, Cam," he said without looking up. "Just wanted to be sure I wasn't out of certificates." He peered into the envelope and said, "Good. I've got 2 left." Cameron took the coffee pot to the table and refilled her father's mug. "What's going to happen to the body when you're done with it?" "Oh, most likely a pauper's grave. The sheriff thinks the man's a transient, so his body will probably end up unclaimed, with no one caring what time he died or that he died at all, you know?" he said, suddenly thoughtful. "It's a sad world we live in when a human being leaves so little of a mark that no one even realizes it when he's gone." Cameron heard a snap as her mamma pushed the button on the toaster. "You reap what you sow," she said. "Now let's talk about something more pleasant, like the weather, for instance. If you look out the window, you'll see it's like summer outside, warmer than it's been this time of year for as long as I can remember. Here, girl, take this." Her grandmother reached out the plate, loaded with food. Cameron took it and set it in front of Pat on the yellow gingham placemat. Yellow was her grandmother's favorite color, one she wove through the room like a golden thread. "I like my kitchen cheerful," she'd say, "because the kitchen is the soul of the house." True to her word, the round oak table always had fresh yellow flowers in the middle, the blooms nodding lazily into the sun like sleeping heads. Now Cameron stole a glance at her grandmother, who at this point turned her attention to running water into a pot. "What is it, Cammy?" Patrick asked. Startled, Cameron could only look at him blankly. Patrick focused his gaze on her with sudden intensity. "You've got a strange look on your face. You're chewing your nails again. I know you," he said, wagging a piece of toast at her. "You're up to something. What's in your head?" Cameron pulled her fingers away from her mouth, a habit that betrayed her whenever she was nervous. Struggling, she smiled and said, "Nothing." "Come on now, it's not like you to play games." She shot a quick glance at her grandmother, who was now engrossed in her scrubbing. Her father leaned toward her, and she lowered her voice to just above a whisper. "All right, I have this idea. Actually, I've had it for a long time, but that doesn't matter. Anyway, what I'm going to say is going to sound crazy, but I want you to hear all of it before you say no." "How about I just say no now and save time?" He munched on his toast. "Come on, Dad. Listen, the sheriff's got an assistant to help him when you're the one who could use a hand. You always say you've got too much to do and not enough time to do it. You need your own assistant." He whispered now too, leaning in conspiratorially.
Right, except there's a problem. There's not a lot of coroner material in Silverton. I know a person. I'm thinking of someone who'd be ready to go at a moment's notice, she went on eagerly. Someone who understands the field, someone you could trust. And who is this miracle worker of Silverton?
Cameron paused for just a moment. Glancing over to make sure Mama wasn't listening, she whispered,
Me! You?
Yes, me. Let me work for you. Her father pulled back in order to stare at her full in the face, his blue eyes squinting at her as though he had never seen her before. Forgetting to keep his voice low, he said,
Oh, baby, you don't know what you're asking. It's a hard job, different from what you see in your books. What I do is real life. We're just a tiny operation, which means I do it all. I have to pull the dead people out of cars and lift waterlogged corpses out of bathtubs. You don't want to see that. Besides, your grandmother's already worried enough about you as it is.
Cameron knew this would be his first line of objection, but her mind had already worked it through, and she was ready with her defense. But there's nothing to worry about. I'm a straight-A student. I don't do drugs or smoke or do any of that stuff. And I already know what I want to do with my life. I want to go into forensics. You're always saying we don't get enough time together, and this would change that. Dad, my plan makes sense. You know it does.
Except you're too young to be sure that this is your future, he countered. Why don't we wait and see if that's what you want later? Like, say, when you're out of college.
So you're penalizing me because I already know what I want? No, he said, his brow furrowed with concentration.
I'm saying 17 is still young, Cammy. Death is a hard business. Why subject yourself to it?
She stood silent because there was no way to answer. Since she was a science geek, she was of course drawn to its absolutes, and those would be her tools in forensics. What happened when a person died, and the puzzle of death was part of it too. But it was more than that. In her books, she saw bodies in every conceivable level of decay. Some felled by their own biology, while others had been taken by the hands of a killer. And yet the dead all had one tragic thing in common. They had no voice. At times she wondered at the parallel between herself, her past, and the dead she wanted to serve. It was a strange thought, really, because she had a perfectly good home with loving people watching over her, and yet a whole section of her life had been buried along with Hannah's memory. How did that make her feel? In a way, she felt silence too. It was the power to give voice that had drawn her to forensics. The dead told a story that a pathologist, if they were good enough, could hear, and Cameron wanted to be that person. She wanted to be the translator, and maybe when she learned that language, she could in turn speak for herself. But all of that was too complicated for the morning's question. When pressed by her father again, she just shrugged. I don't know, she said. I just want to. And I want to start learning now.
Absolutely not! Her grandmother roared from her station behind the sink.
Cameron's head jerked up in time to see the pot clatter to the porcelain sink. Her grandmother's hands were planted firmly on her hips, and she looked taller, Cameron realized, than she had just moments before.
Patrick, tell her no!
Mama's finger pointed at Cameron.
And shame on you for even asking such a thing. It's out of the question.
Her father leaned back in his chair so that it balanced on just two legs. He seemed to stare at his half-eaten eggs as though he could divine the answers from them, as though they were entrails read by the prophets of old. Something was going on in his mind, and that something gave Cameron hope. He hadn't said no yet. In fact, he didn't say anything.
Come on, Dad, she whispered. Please. You can't be considering this, Patrick. It's taken her down the wrong path. Are you listening to me? She needs to stay away from the darkness. You know what I'm saying. Are you listening to me?
Slowly, Patrick's chair tipped forward until it came to a rest with a thump on the wooden floor.
I'm listening,
he said, and answered quietly, and I don't like what I'm hearing.
You can't mean that. Ma, you and me, we're both too afraid. How many years has it been?
He shook his head wearily.
We're running around chasing ghosts. We've got to stop.
You're making a mistake, Mama cried, but Patrick didn't seem to hear.
We've got to stop, he said again. We've got to let Cameron decide who she wants to be.
Her grandmother stood frozen, waiting, while Cameron felt her own blood thaw as her heart began to beat again. Finally, her father slapped his knee and said,
All right, then.
All right? Cameron asked, elated.
Yes, all right, he told her. Cameron, you're officially hired as assistant to the coroner of Silverton, Colorado. How does $10 an hour sound?
I love you, Dad, she cried, sliding onto her father's lap. His strong arms encircled her, pulling her tight. She could hear the gurgle of his stomach beneath his shirt. She heard something else, too. Her grandmother's slippered feet as they stomped across the floor and the slam of the door as she left the kitchen. How mad is she? She asked in a small voice.
She'll get over it, Cammy. She's a good woman. She's tried to be your mother, to do what's best for you. She's worried you'll go too far into the macabre.
With his finger, he pulled up her chin, and his blue eyes looked worried.
You won't, will you?
No. She returned his gaze unflinching. I just like the science.
I like the way the dead don't talk back. Makes for a lot less friction on the job.
Oh, but they do. They still tell us stories. You're right. I guess I just never thought of it that way. He slid her from his lap and stood, picking up his folder with the 2 death certificates inside.
We'd better move.
There's a dead man waiting for us, he said. Let's go find out what he has to say. So I have read this book fairly often, and it is a fabulous murder mystery where you get so much forensics that you actually might need to have a strong stomach to read it. But I found it all so fascinating. And if that's your type of mystery, then you're going to love this too. And there's plenty more of the series after that you can look forward to. Thank you for watching, and have a wonderful long weekend, everyone.